What happens when everything you thought was true turns out to be false? And where do you go from there? Kevin Crye was born in 1976. He moved to Shasta County as a young boy. He grew up playing sports and was on the baseball and football teams at Anderson High School. He graduated in 1994. He attended Shasta College and Simpson University, where he graduated in 1999. It was at this time that he met his wife, Sarah. They now have 3 children together, and Kevin recently became a grandfather. Crye has spent his career in athletics, with a focus on youth. In 2019, he opened Ninja Coalition, a popular gym and obstacle course for kids that partners with local schools. In 2020, Kevin's professional life was thrown into turmoil when the COVID lockdowns shuttered his businesses. A turning point came in October of 2021, during a Board of Supervisors meeting. In that meeting, Crye pleaded with the board majority, and Joe Clementi in particular, to assert local sovereignty over Governor Newsom's heavy-handed lockdowns, but this fell on deaf ears. Incensed by this lack of leadership, Kevin made the fateful decision to run for District 1 supervisor. Crye was an underdog from the start. His opponent, Resner, had name recognition, money, and endorsements from across the Shasta County political establishment. What the Crye campaign lacked in money and endorsements, they made up for by knocking on thousands of doors in District 1. By the time of the June primary in 2022, Resner failed to get over 50% of the vote, and the contest was continued to November. In a now infamous moment, Resner threw a lavish victory party on election night, before the votes had even been counted. The move was seen as premature and tone-deaf to the many District 1 voters that were still struggling to make ends meet in a poor economy. The next few months of campaigning were a flurry of activity. Crye, whose profile continued to rise, was still seen as a long shot, fending off calls by political insiders to drop out of the race and preserve his reputation. Crye continued on. Meanwhile, his opponent's missteps continued to add up. Resner, whose campaign received thousands of dollars from the Emerson family of Sierra Pacific Industries, voted to approve a land sale tied to that family, blocking access to the proposed Wind River Casino site. That vote would come to haunt Resner, as it was later deemed illegal by the courts and was viewed by some as political cronyism. The initial results of the election had Crye down by a seemingly insurmountable 8 points, but over the next few weeks, that gap narrowed. It was during this time that Crye says he received calls from the political opposition threatening a recall if he managed to win, which he did by 90 votes. Crye was sworn in with Chris Kelstrom in December and took his seat on the board in January of 2023. Crye's first test came only a few weeks into his term, when a resolution was brought forward by Patrick Jones to review the county's contract with Dominion Voting Systems. Crye joined with the conservative majority and voted to cancel the contract with Dominion, making Shasta County the first in the nation to do so. It was around this time that a group of local activists began meeting to form what would come to be known as Shasta County Citizens for Stable Government, a loose association of far-left progressives, liberal Democrats, and former Republicans, formed the core of the group, which was a response to the newly elected conservative majority. Though both Kelstrom and Crye had voted to cancel the Dominion contract, the group chose to focus on Kevin. By February, it was clear that a nascent recall movement was forming behind the scenes, with the support of at least one sitting supervisor.
Supervisor Rickard.
Yes, I have a question. So if someone were to decide, or a group would decide that they wanted to have a recall, how would this impact that? Just asking for a friend.
By March, polls began appearing on social media, gauging support for a potential recall, but the pollsters failed to account for self-selection bias and their own wishful thinking. The polling effort was led by Eric and Dana Silverstein, who later loaned $30,000 to the recall campaign. Dana, a prominent Democrat, was the former co-host of a long-running afternoon talk show in Seattle.
Do those who have died actually communicate with those of us who are still living?
Some would say the answer is definitely yes. We'll talk with 2 people tomorrow who claim to communicate with a loved one who is deceased.
By early April, the effort to recall Crye was official and was being reported in a news cafe. Donnie Chamberlain, in a departure from journalistic ethics, not only reported on the effort to recall Crye, but inserted herself into the story by signing the recall petition and donating money to the effort. By April 25th, an official notice of intent to recall was presented to Crye during a board meeting. By this time, Crye had only been in office for 93 days. The recall effort started off strong, and recallers were in high spirits. Spokesperson Jeff Gorder, a retired public defender and a Democrat, said the group hoped to gather 6,000 signatures in time to make it to the November ballot, and also promised the committee would put forward a recommendation for a moderate candidate to fill Crye's seat. But this never happened. Due to a law enacted by Gavin Newsom only months earlier, the governor now had the power to appoint a replacement to fill the seat until the next scheduled election, giving the voters of District 1 no say in who would represent them for nearly 9 months. In public, the recallers downplayed this concern, but behind the scenes most understood that the effort was doomed to fail unless they could secure a promise from Newsom not to appoint. The recallers drafted a groveling letter to Newsom in May, begging him to leave the seat vacant. Notably, the letter was signed by Supervisor Mary Rickard, whose ranch provided a quarter beef cut to a recall fundraiser and whose husband Jim donated money to the recall effort. Fellow Supervisor Tim Garman also showed his support for the recall in June, when he wore a pro-recall t-shirt on the dais, in the vain hope of appeasing the left, who had attacked him mercilessly since he replaced Leonard Modi a year before. Though the recallers foolishly held out hope that the governor would promise not to appoint a replacement, as the hot summer months dragged on and the deadline for signatures approached, it became clear that Newsom would never respond, and the recallers were on their own. By the September deadline, the recallers were able to submit 5,104 signatures, almost 1,000 less than their original goal. In past California recall efforts, a consistent average of 20 to 25% of signatures were rejected. In the Crye recall, however, only 3.5% of signatures were removed by the ROV. The signature verification was also finished in less than 2 weeks, although legally the ROV office had 30 business days to complete the verification. When members of the community called out these discrepancies, the recallers became defensive, claiming they had removed invalid signatures before turning them into the ROV. But they couldn't get their story straight and gave conflicting accounts of how many had been removed. Jeff Gorder claimed 500, while Dana Silberstein said 700 signatures had been removed. The real numbers may never be known, however, as petition signatures are protected by law and cannot be examined, and there is no way to independently confirm the phantom signatures the recallers claim to have removed. Other factors at the state level conspired in favor of the recall group. In October, Emergency Measure AB 969 was signed into law by Gavin Newsom, limiting hand-counted elections. The law, which was a direct response to Shasta County's move to end the Dominion contract, confirmed to many that the governor would almost certainly use his power to appoint a successor if Crye were recalled. The bill was authored by Democrat Gail Pellerin, who is a good friend of former Shasta County ROV Kathy Darling Allen. Fundraising efforts picked up in the summer and fall, with Eric Silberstein giving $11,000 and Charles and Judith Menor giving over $8,000 to the recall. Tens of thousands of dollars were also received from the Emerson family of Sierra Pacific Industries and local labor unions, as well as the Tehama County Democratic Central Committee. The recall also got a boost from liberal donors outside the county, including Betty Yee, former state controller under Gavin Newsom, as well as thousands of dollars from Hollywood producer Kathleen Kennedy. All in all, the recall group raised over $300,000. Election day, March 5th, was rainy and overcast, and in-person voting numbers, considered an indicator of conservative turnout, were low. As the first results came in at 8 p.m. that night, the yes on recall vote was well over 50%. The recall group threw a party on election night to celebrate their hard work. Nathan Pinckney gave a stirring speech, with Supervisor Tim Garman looking on approvingly. As the final drop of the night was announced at 1 in the morning, it looked like the smug predictions of the recall group would come to fruition.
Now it appears Shasta County Supervisor Kevin Crye will be recalled and removed from office. The recall effort appears to be successful. 53% voting yes. That's more than 2,000 yes votes to 1,800 no votes.
The next day, on social media and in the comment section of ANewsCafe, the recallers were jubilant, with Donnie Chamberlain already reporting on the timeline for Crye's inevitable departure from the dais. By March 12th, however, the count had swung in Crye's favor. As the weeks wore on, the recall group put on a brave face, encouraging their supporters to keep the faith. On March 28th, The final results were announced by the ROV's office. Kevin Crye had survived his recall by 50 votes. After the dust had settled, many of the recallers were demoralized. The numbers painted a sobering picture. As it turned out, 300 more people had signed the recall petition than voted yes on the recall. This fact more than any other confounded the recallers, who believed they were in the majority and that District 1 voters thought the same as they did. The recallers had to face the fact that what they believed to be true, that Kevin Crye was sowing chaos and division in their community, and that everyone could see it, was a lie. In fact, in their year-long effort to oust Crye, they had become everything they falsely accused Crye of being. They were the ones sowing division where it had not existed before. They were the ones who, in board meeting after board meeting, were causing chaos, playing politics, and wasting everyone's time. Sadly, the voters of the Buckeye area were the first to be blamed. In a gross display of anti-worker sentiment, some recallers labeled these blue-collar voters white trash for supporting Crye. Others laid the blame on Gavin Newsom, whose heavy-handed changes to the recall process and lack of support doomed the effort to failure before it had even begun. To anyone paying attention, however, it was clear that the tactics and strategies of the recall group itself were the most to blame. The decision to recall a supervisor who had only been in office for a few months went against the average American's fundamental sense of fairness and willingness to give everyone a chance. The recallers also went out of their way to push their most militant voices to the forefront, whose divisive displays alienated moderate voters. One of those militant voices was Nathan Pinckney, who made a tactical error at a Board of Supervisors meeting when addressing Patrick Jones.
We're trying to get rid of Kevin Crye to give you less power.
It became clear that the recall was a cynical ploy to neutralize the conservative board majority, and Patrick Jones in particular, by targeting the supervisor they thought was in the weakest position, Kevin Crye. In that sense, Pinckney did more to lay bare the false claims of the recall group than the Crye campaign ever could. Kevin, taking the high ground, saw the root cause of the recall as something beyond politics. Early on, Crye correctly identified the recall as an attack on his faith, his family, and his conservative beliefs. Though the recallers denied these claims, their actions over the next year proved Crye's assessment correct. The recallers spent thousands of dollars on ads depicting Crye as a demon. Other recallers dressed up as witches and cast spells in the board chambers, mocking Crye's Christian faith. Still others chose to show their disdain of conservatives in general by giving long-winded diatribes.
The seeds we sow, man.
Improv.
And did you know this thing right here can go up there and flip them votes?
Musical parodies.
And sold out his way.
And even puppet shows.
I'd like to introduce my friend.
Hi, Kevin Crye! It's nice seeing you in person again.
This lack of self-awareness, poor strategy, and general disdain for conservative voters and for God ultimately doomed their effort. A few weeks after the results were announced, Kevin held a gathering to celebrate. Unlike the infamous victory party of his former rival, or the premature celebration of the recallers, the event was modest and intimate, and the culmination of over 2 years of non-stop campaigning. The recallers, in their short-sighted attempt to take down Crye, lost sight of the big picture, while Crye played the long game. Forgotten in the drama of the recall was Measure D, making Shasta County a charter county. That measure, put forth by Kevin, was passed overwhelmingly by voters and goes into effect in January. Crye is now a known quantity in Republican politics and has spoken at a number of events and garnered the endorsements of prominent conservatives like Carrie Lake. Where Kevin goes from here is anyone's guess. The recallers, however, are a different story. The recall is now in the rearview mirror. Most of Shasta County has moved on. Will the recallers do the same?
That's life. That's life. And I can't deny it. Many times I thought of cutting out, but my heart won't buy it. But if there's nothing shaking come this here July, I'm gonna roll myself up in a big ball and